Welcome back, everybody. Today I am taking a viewer request from John Rocks 540, and they asked me to analyze Vertiv Holdings, ticker symbol VRT, which is an electrical component and equipment manufacturer which currently has a market cap of $35 billion and has been on an absolute tear this year. So jumping right into the company's fact sheet, we can see on the right-hand side here that obviously this ticker symbol is VRT. They are headquartered in Westerville, Ohio, with other headquarters regionally in China, India, the Philippines, and Italy. They have 27,000 worldwide employees, and this company has a lot of large major telecom customers, including America Mobile, AT&T, China Mobile, Ericsson, Telefonica, Verizon, Vodafone, and many more. Now, what Vertiv does specifically is they help provide applications as well as hardware, software, different analytical services for their customers in largely their data centers in order to make their data centers run as efficiently as possible. Down here at the bottom, we can see their product offerings, and about 61% or 2/3 of their revenues come from critical infrastructure and solutions, which consists of things like power, thermal, and IT infrastructure, as well as other like solutions and service portfolio things that they add into those to kind of make things run more efficiently for their customers. By geography, the company is quite well diversified, with about 50% of its business in the Americas and another third approximately in Asia Pacific and a quarter in Europe, the Middle East, and Australasia. And if we take a look at Vertiv's end markets, we can see that about 70% of their end markets are data centers, with another 20% in communication networks and about 10% in commercial and industrial markets. So we can see that this company is highly reliant on the build out of data centers, of communication networks, of things that help make the current IT environment in our world function. So there's definitely a ton of growth there, both today and in the future. So this company should have pretty good prospects going forward. And VRT was brought to my attention by John Rocks following the company's earnings, in which they had a huge spike in their earnings per shares as well as their orders. So this is basically a major bellwether for a lot of the AI stocks, including Nvidia, Supermicro, and Broadcom. So as Investor Business Daily lays out, Vertiv earnings jumped by 79%, which easily beat analyst views, and they saw revenue rise 8% to $1.64 billion, which was slightly above expectations. The company's organic orders jumped 60% in a constant currency, which means that they're taking more and more orders, which is always a good sign. So with all of this good news, Vertiv's stock soared nearly 18% to $93.26 shortly after the open following its earnings, which brought the shares to a new all-time high. And as IBD lays out down at the bottom here, Vertiv isn't directly involved in artificial intelligence, but because they make coolant systems, other electrical components that are used heavily in these data centers that AI needs, Vertiv is considered a de facto AI play. So if you're in on the AI boom, Vertiv might be an interesting stock for you to look at. And so before we jump into the numbers, I just want to thank John Rocks one more time for giving me the awesome idea. And I want to ask all of you to please like this video and subscribe to my channel, as it really means a lot to me as a smaller YouTuber, and it helps me determine what kind of content that you guys like to see. Thank you so much, and with that, let's get into the data. Vertiv's revenue has grown really nicely over the last 5 years at about a 12% compound annual growth rate, although I do want to point out that we are seeing a little bit of a slowing in the trailing 12 months, but that really only reflects 1/4 of difference between 2023 and the TTM. EBITDA saw a massive spike in 2023, and it is continuing to get higher and higher. On the other hand, operating earnings per share have been much more cyclical, being negative in 2019 and 2020, being positive but not super high in 2021 or 2022. But in 2023, in the trailing 12 months, we are seeing a pretty good spike in those earnings per share. Obviously, then that makes the biggest question: can VRT continue with this success? Which, if you dig into the backlogs on their order book, you will see that they probably can keep up these sort of numbers at least for the next couple of quarters into 2025. The company's gross margins have fluctuated a little bit, but have stabilized and started to grow again at about 35%. Their operating margins really took off following 2022 and currently sit at about 14%. And the company's return on assets have fluctuated quite significantly with their earnings per share, but currently sit at about 5.25%. Not too bad. Vertiv has issued shares to shareholders just about every single year that the company's been public, although in the trailing 12 months we have seen the number of shares outstanding come down a little bit, so maybe this is the sign that Vertiv no longer needs to issue shares to shareholders in order to raise money, and they can start buying back those shares and really start driving these earnings per share increases. Taking a look at the balance sheet, the company has never kept a lot of cash on hand. It currently sits at about $300 million. But with these cyclical type companies, it is pretty common to see the amount of cash on hand fluctuate a lot with the market cycles, so this is nothing strange. What I do want to point out is the amount of debt that VRT does have. It's currently sitting just under $3 billion. So if you compare that to their cash on hand, it's about 10 times the cash that they have on hand. Now, obviously, the company has other ways to pay off that debt, not just through the cash that they have on hand, but this is not the same company as like an Nvidia or a Google or a Meta, where they just have tons of cash and next to zero debt. This is a leveraged company. And due to that leverage, VRT does pay about $170 million in net interest expenses, at least in the last 12 months. And this number has fluctuated a little bit over time, but it is significantly down if we compare it to 2019. So overall, I would say the company's balance sheet is headed in the right direction. Levered free cash flow has seen a huge expansion in the last couple years, and this is one of the brightest points of the data that I'm looking at today, because obviously this means that VRT is creating a ton of extra cash flow that they can reinvest into better products, or they can start using to buy back shares, increase their dividend payout, etc. But the moral of the story is that free cash flow is going up, the cash flow per share is growing, and this is always a good sign to see, especially when you have a cyclical company. Maybe Vertiv is slowly coming out of that cyclicality due to this AI boom, and it can become a much more stable company in the future. Moving over to the price to earnings graph, what we're looking at here is a graph of the weekly closing price to earnings ratios as shown by this black line, which were negative in 2020, then went way positive in 2021, and have been fluctuating down and up ever since, currently sitting at 85.24, as you can see on the far right here. If I could just hover over it, there we go. Or you could look at the current PE. And this red line in the middle is the average PE of 29.97 over the last 5 years. So theoretically then, anytime we see the PE of VRT over this red line, that would indicate a time where the company is overvalued compared to its historical average. And anytime it is under that red line, it is undervalued compared to its historical average. Now, the one thing I will say is because a very large number of weeks contained negative numbers, that is skewing this average PE down quite a bit. I would probably say without those negative numbers, we're looking at an average PE closer to like the 40s, maybe as high as the 50s. But if we compare that to the current PE of 85.24, no matter what, we're looking at a time where this company is overvalued compared to its long-term average. If we move on to the value chart, what we're looking at now is weekly closing prices of the stock, so $26 per share on 7/16/2021, and its current close is at $90.35 here in 2024. Compare that to the purple lines, which show the theoretical fair value of this company for each year. So in 2021, theoretically, the fair value was $7.39. Then in 2022, $4.35. Then in 2023, $26.29. That number is figured out by taking the earnings per share from that year and multiplying it by its fair value PE, which I assigned 22 here due to the growth rate of 22% compound annual growth for the last 5 years. And then the final thing we're looking at with the thinner purple line is projections of earnings over the next 3 years when we use the projected compound annual growth rate that I find through various different parties online. So in 2024, this stock would be worth $31 per share. In 2025, theoretically, it's worth about $42 per share. And then in 2026, the stock would be worth $56.67 per share. Obviously, with the current price being at $90 per share, we're looking at something that is quite overvalued. But I do want to point out that the projected compound annual growth rate for the next 3 to 5 years is 35%. So if that is the actual growth rate of Vertiv over that time, we should assign a fair value PE of 35 to this company. And when that is done, we see that although the stock is very overvalued by this year's estimates, $90 versus an estimate of about $50 by the end of the year, it's really not that overvalued if we're looking out a couple of years into the future. So as far as 2026 is concerned, this stock could be worth $91.28, which means that the price of Vertiv today is trading at the expected company earnings for the year 2026. This is very common with growth stocks, that they trade at a premium that would basically match a few years of earnings in advance. But of course, then the big question becomes, can this stock continue to grow at that rate? That's always a big question, especially for cyclical companies like the electrical industry, or especially companies that create hardware for the computing industry. So, think about Micron, think about Nvidia or AMD. They're very cyclical companies. They don't always go straight up because there are booms and busts. There's lots of build out, then there's no build out. So that leads nicely into the cons that I see in this company, which first and foremost is that it's trading well above its long-term average price to earnings ratio. So I never view that as a great thing unless you believe that this company's growth is just starting and then that growth will continue for the next 5 or 10 years. Second, it is a cyclical industry, so it might be better to wait for a weak year or two. Right now we're seeing the strong years, which always look incredibly strong. But I would recommend checking out companies like AMD or Nvidia in the past, maybe Micron as an example, or a company like Seagate. There's tons of examples where these hardware companies go through this major boom and bust where they have excellent years and then they have terrible years for a couple years. And that's just a part of the life cycle of these electronic component companies. And then third, I think the growth expectations are entirely baked into the current market price. Like I showed you, it's trading at about 2026's fair value, and that assumes a 35% growth rate, which is a pretty extreme growth rate by any stretch of the imagination. So if that growth does not materialize, Vertiv could take a nosedive in the near future. But of course, not everything is bad. What I really like about this company is that its AI and computing adjacent products should have growth for decades to come. I do think AI is the real deal, and we might eventually face a kind of 2001 type experience where a bunch of companies just absolutely crash because there's too much hype over it. But just like the internet in the 1990s and 2000s, I think AI is here to stay, and it's only going to prove to be more and more effective over time. So it is quite difficult to say that a company that is so actively involved in this space is a bad investment. Second, the current industrial and computing build-out means that there's huge demand today as well. So we're not just looking at future growth potential, we're also talking about growth potential that's coming today in the here and now. So you're not taking a bet on a company that should become profitable once the industry matures. You're actually dealing with a very mature company in a maturing industry, and there's tons of growth to be had. So that's always a positive as well. And then third, the recent strength in margin growth and return on assets shows that Vertiv may be figuring out how to kind of stabilize its balance sheet and its earnings over longer periods of time, which I think could lead to some really good earnings growth as well as just a higher multiple that the company would command on the stock market in general, because you're not dealing with that type of cyclicality over and over again. But that, of course, is just conjecture. I do want to remind everybody that this is not financial advice, and you do need to make these decisions on your own. But for me personally, I really like Vertiv as a company. I think it's a very interesting investment. I just don't think it's the greatest investment right now. I'm definitely going to keep this company on my watch list. I'm going to wait for a couple of down years when the market gets really pessimistic about this company, and then I might think about buying into it, because it does seem like it's an industry leader in its field, and there is a very long 10, 20, 30 year plus build out of growth potential that I see for companies like Vertiv, like other companies, Nvidia, super microcomputers, etc. So that's my final thoughts. Once again, thank you, John Rocks 540, for the suggestion. And one final time, if you have not already, please like and subscribe and leave a comment down below letting me know your thoughts about Vertiv or any other stock in the stock market. I'm always looking for recommendations, so if you have a stock that you'd like to be analyzed, just let me know. Thank you so much, guys, and have a wonderful day. Bye.